So we have some really special guests from the film. Here's one of them coming up right now. You might recognize him, Chris Kalinsky. Isaiah Kalinsky. Alan Schwartz. Dr. Bob Stern. Do you want to come up? I don't think it's on. Oh. Hello? Hello? Well, now it is. All it took was a tap. So I'm really honored to have you guys up here tonight and to have been in the film. So we're here to just answer some questions. If anybody has any comments, criticisms.
I see one in the back.
Oh. Could you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, put it in a short and concise way, and have the kids stand, and have it, in terms of prevention and what you can do. The game will always be there. Certainly having someone on the sidelines is trained to document if there's any questions, coach aware, pull them out, first thing. Lots and lots of training, but changing sometimes. Honestly, in Maryland, where I'm from, there should be someone on the sideline, a parent who's trained to do the concussion scoring. And CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they make it very clear how to do it. It's just one thing that goes on the wayside, unfortunately. But if kids can see this, this would be an amazing thing. You should get it. You should help the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm really happy about is that with this film, we're really making a concerted effort to get it to the people who most need to see it, and parents and amateur athletes. So we have a pretty good outreach plan to get it into schools, to get it to sports leagues, and then, Chris and Bob's organization, I think, plans to use it, and they have tremendous connections and constant contact, right, with the kinds of populations that really need to see it.
Thank you, Steve. Yes.
Okay, give me the mic back.
Yeah, this message just doesn't get to a lot of places. I'll give you an example. Last month, we've been working on a major public school systems strategy because we know they have no medical resources whatsoever. And so it started with Chicago Public Schools, thanks to Sandy Tennant giving us an introduction. We trained 3,000 schools. They mandated an hour-and-a-half training program. We just now took it to LA, and they canceled football practice, unprecedented in the history of the world, I think, on a Monday, and required 1,000 coaches to come listen. And I asked them, this was in August, and I asked, how many of you have had concussion training prior to today? And 4 people raised their hand. And so you don't know, when you let your kid out the door, who's in charge. And so it's kind of why I say things like you're playing Russian roulette, because we know what we should be doing, but we're not doing it.
While we're waiting for the next, hang on 1 second. Okay, I also want to, he's not going to come up, he's a very shy individual, but I want to have Steve Divick, who's executive producer of the film and who really brought this film. We just set a bench press record in his age group, which we won't mention. He's a very strong guy.
Also, Steve, would you introduce everyone standing up there just so that everyone knows?
I did that, I thought.
No.
Oh, okay, here's Alan Schwartz. Dr. Bob Stern, who he is. Chris, and Isaiah. All right, I'm Steve James.
We got a question.
Okay.
I was just going to ask if there's any research going into protective gear, like helmets and shoulder pads and any support for.
So the question is there any research going into protective gear like helmets, shoulder pads, or whatever to help make it safer?
You know, the answer is constant research, but the reality is, you know, if you're going 20 miles an hour, right now you give about an inch of space to reduce that force from getting to your brain. You think about what your car does for you when you go into a wall at 20 miles an hour. It troubles, you have an airbag and a seatbelt. Right now we just have plastic and about an inch of foam, and it's just never going to reduce enough force. So this is not going to be that sort of solution to this problem. You can make little incremental gains, but your brain's floating fluid. It's not going to stop that fast.
Up there in the back.
How did the movie come together? How did you guys meet up and decide to do this?
It happened because Steve, who I introduced a moment ago, read Chris's book and loved it and optioned it to, and thought it would make a good documentary. And so Steve approached me and said, do you have an interest in this issue of concussions? I said yes, because I'm a sports fan. I live in Chicago, a Bears fan, and I've been involved in sports my whole life. And so I had an interest in it. And then when I read Chris's book, despite that, I still had an interest in it. No, it's a great book. It really is, and a new edition's coming out.
Yes, tomorrow.
With a foreword by Isaiah. So it really is a terrific book. And because the book, like the film, I hope the film manages to do this, sort of tells Chris's story, but also goes beyond that to really assess where we are with our understanding of this issue and where we've fallen down, and doesn't just focus on football. And I think there's a new edition update some things clearly.
Crazy.
A lot of updates. So you really should get the book. So, but anyway, once I read the book, I thought, I think this is a great basis for a documentary, and so we got underway, and we began to approach some of these gentlemen as well as other people that you see in the film, and made the film.
So, Chris, I wonder if you see any major advances in technology and protective gear you think will help, or is it mostly changing the rules and the way education and what games play?
Everybody heard the question? Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at your top options for reducing trauma to the brain, they really aren't in technology in the way we think they are. One of the things the NHL is actually going to be doing is going backwards in armor. They realize that having plastic shoulder pads and plastic elbow pads suddenly, in a hard shell helmet, open the door to hitting people in the head. Most people, when you don't have a helmet on, get angry when you hit them in the head. Well, most people. It doesn't mind. But it hurts, and you bleed, and you get angry. And so when we cover up, we expose our brain to more damage. So the idea is it's going to be changing, it's going to be straight reform of the games. Should 6-year-olds be hit in the head? There was 1,000 times a year. There was a high school football player in Illinois last year recorded with 2,235 blows to the head, exceeding 10 Gs, with 75% happening in practice. So we said, hey, let's just take them out of practice, and suddenly you've got half the exposure. So unfortunately, the solutions are not simple and like flip a switch. They are teach people how to do things right, and then reconsider. If you think the NFL is dangerous, why would you expose kids to the same trauma, knowing you can't put a trainer on the sideline, knowing their head is gigantic relative to their body, knowing they're on a strong neck, knowing all these other things.
All right, I want to ask. I'm a scientist. This might sound weird, but as the scientist here, I don't want policy and rule changes to occur too quickly and to be too much of a knee-jerk reaction. They have to be based on some science, on some logic. But the logic is that we weren't meant to hit our heads over and over again. And we don't have to wait for study after study to say, this is the number of hits that are bad for you. This one's okay. This is the amount of force. This is the number of years. We don't know when those answers are going to come out, if they ever do. But you can hold back the science a little bit and just act logically, that we aren't meant to hit our heads over and over again. We need to do something to take the heads out of all of these activities.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, you know, that we're better to be overly cautious than not cautious enough when it comes to this issue. If we're gonna err.
What was it as a reporter that, you said that Chris's footnote caught your attention? What was it in that footnote that caught your attention that you knew that this was a story that you had to latch onto?
The question was, what about the footnotes really caught my eye when I saw Chris's manuscript? And it was just that the book was meticulously done. I mean, every assertion he was making had a footnote attached to it. And when I wanted to figure out, okay, he's saying that such and such is true or was found in 1988 by so-and-so, I could look it up. There it was. He wasn't just throwing stuff out there. I mean, when you get a manuscript for a book from a professional wrestler, you have a certain image of what you're going to receive. And so, I mean, honestly, the footnote, I mean, this was a guy who really had done his homework. And you took him a lot more seriously than you might have had it just been the ravings of somebody trying to raise awareness about something. He brought the goods.
Let's open up the doors to my life. I am lucky because, you know, what I suffered was a number of very mild brain injuries. Certainly severe and moderate brain injuries have their own separate story to them. And you get a severe brain injury and you probably are never the same. We're trying to deal with this is really about a different problem, which is that little tap, tap, tap that you really can't tell in the moment is a problem. And what does that cause later on? And we really have opened up the door that it does cause a degenerative, progressive brain disease. And so I appreciate that you think I seem fine, very much.
He's really not that great.
Yeah, Bob works with me, and he sees the other half of the coin. But the reality is, even if I had it right now, you couldn't tell because it takes so long for you to lose enough brain cells. I mean, but if you look at any of these guys, I mean, for Dave, like a guy like Dave Dorsey, who shot himself in the chest at 50 because he'd become violent and he lost his memory. But at 45, they were recruiting him to run for the Senate seat that Obama actually eventually won in Illinois. Like, you go off the cliff pretty fast once you start losing enough cells in the right places. So right now, of the people who have had my level of brain trauma, in our brain bank now of 136 brains, and the guys who played more than 10 years of football or other contact sports, it's over 90% who have it. And so I have to assume there's at least a decent chance it's in me, or it's in a guy like this, or it's other guys who are here in the audience, and I have to be prepared for that.
So now you're saying that you should actually limit the amount of time that you're in more high contact sports, or?
Yeah, the question is, should you limit the amount of time you're in high contact sports? And the answer is no. The answer is a clear yes. You know, what the early data, which isn't perfect, is telling us is that it's exposure based. So how many times you're hitting the head, how long, when, how young do you start? You know, there's genetic issues, a whole bunch of variables. But clearly, the younger you start and the more times you're hitting the head, that's worse. And so the idea that, you know, and it's one of the twisted kind of things about success in contact sports, is that if you're good, you can't get out, because they're going to keep pushing you up. You're going to get that college scholarship, they're going to give you money then to do it when you're older, and suddenly you're a guy with 25 years and 1,000 blows to the head, and you are screwed. But you got a little money in your pocket if you don't give it all away, which most guys do, partially because the brains don't. So it's a bizarre little world.
I want to ask Isaiah a question, because I assume you're still connected with guys who are playing in the league and talk to guys. What's your sense of, is there a change going on with guys in the league that they may not admit to the media or to the public because it's fraught with some peril? Do you feel like there's a change going on with the thinking around this issue with guys that are in the league presently?
Yeah, I think publicly for sure. Chris and I have been going to Super Bowls for, I think this will be our 4th year now, and we've heard every single story you can ever hear privately about this issue. So guys really open up to us in settings that you really wouldn't talk about this issue, right? A bar, a nightclub, but superstars in the NFL being able to talk about this in ways that would, are harrowing, in a lot of ways for a lot of people. Put some of these stories to shame, but they're not going to just open up about this. So,
And why won't this?
I think the first reason is pretty obvious to a lot of people. They're making a lot of money, and the guys we talk to are not just, myself. I grinded out 8 years, and I was kind of willing to go, but as you.
What was your reaction to the first book?
Yeah, but it's going to be in this book. But the first book, as I was in my 6th year in the NFL, Chris is coming out with that Head Games first version. I refused to read the book for a couple of reasons. And, the biggest reason, I didn't want to be blackballed by anybody in the NFL because I really, I had grown up in poverty. It's kind of a long story, but there's no way I was letting this go. And the other reason for myself was I didn't want to lose confidence. And confidence is the one thing in the NFL that you really have to bank on. Guys that had been kind of beating the odds their whole life are the guys that kind of make the NFL. To lose that in any fashion, I didn't want to subject myself to this. I wouldn't even read versions of Head Games, the first version, in any fashion. Yeah, I wouldn't say I knew Chris in any fashion, going back to the first reason, but, going back to the original question, Steve, guys are definitely open, but guys are definitely open because the NFL has acknowledged it. So some guys feel like there's some umbrella where they can feel that this is a real injury. It's not just some phantom injury, as we've talked about already. So I think that's probably the biggest reason. And, as that continues to be thought of as a normal injury, just like a knee injury or an ankle injury, in that seriousness, it's probably even more serious if you think about it. Then you're gonna be able to see the actual rates continue to increase, not just because it's being talked about, because guys feel more comfortable that they're not being quote unquote soft.
Right.
I talk to guys all the time, and guys just feel that it's an important enough issue and that it's important enough to miss time for, and it's all based on awareness and moving forward.
Well, that's actually encouraging to hear, that there's some change in foot. Someone else had a question down here, yes.
Yeah, I think my question that I'd like to ask Alan, if you could guess what you think the NFL will look like in 15 years, what would you guess?
Actually, I'm pretty confident it's going to look a lot like it does today. No, it really will. And there's no reason it can't. I think that kickoffs will be entirely different. I think you might see something like a free kick from the 50 with the line or a free kick from the 40 with linemen starting at the 50 and the 20, and they're not going to be running 20 miles an hour into each other the way Isaiah, did. I mean, it's nuts. It's completely unnecessary. You can still have Devin Hester, running like a maniac 90 yards down the sidelines. Everyone loves that, but you don't have to have the unnecessary violence concomitant with that. Now, also, you won't be able to, for example, I'd like to do this.
Please. Bring it. Can I do it?
Okay, he's carrying the ball, and you put your head there, okay? I can do that. Sorry. I can do that now, it's perfectly legal. Perfectly legal. I can hit him in the head with my head, no problem. You know why? Because he's not a defenseless receiver. Well, there's no need, football is not about hitting somebody in the head with your own hand. It will be illegal to do that at all levels. Why it isn't yet in high school, I think you should probably ask your state high school athletic commission. Maybe they could send a note to a certain fellow in Indianapolis. But football, the way I think about it is that football, or football in quotes, does not exist or it certainly doesn't exist the way a tree or a building exists. It's a series of actions and behaviors that emerge from rules of conduct and behavior that adults write and supervise. It'll be whatever you guys want it to be if you make enough of a fuss. And Chris was the guy who made the biggest fuss. That's just about the history of sports. Name another person who has changed an aircraft carrier like the NFL, careening along, and he pushed it himself over here. It's true. It's unprecedented, and it will adapt because it wants to survive. The NFL owners are very smart. They're not going to kill one sport.
I guess I have a research question. Of your 138 brains that you have in bank at the moment, it's kind of a two-fold question. So are they all male, and is it specifically just the football that you're going after? Do you have any female brains to start tracking the consequences for male versus female of it? Have you reached out to other organizations to study the low impact at a younger level, so not just the overall career in professional sports? Is that what you're focusing on, or are you just looking at like the small increments over a long period of time?
That's a wonderful, really important question. Of the brains of people who have passed away in our brain bank, we have a small number of female brains. It's in part because of the sports that we're looking at, that people know about, that the family members contact us and say they want to donate their brains. It's also just in part the beginnings of the research. So a goal has to be to look at what's going on in a female brain with this disease. But the larger picture has to do with our living research. How do we get to our answers of what are the risk factors of this disease? Is it those little hits? Is it the bigger hits? Is it the duration? Is it the rest in between? Is it genetics that put someone at risk for it? Those are the things that we don't yet know, and so we're trying to do that in a variety of ways. So we have a very large longitudinal study of alive athletes, male, female, almost equally broken down, across all different types of sports, across all different exposure to brain trauma. And we're following them, it's around 1,000 people eventually, over the course of their life annually, to see how they're doing and to look at risk factors and to look at genetics and then look at their brains after they pass away. We're also looking at other sports like soccer now, with a study in Germany. We're looking at different age ranges and the impact of heading on potential changes that could lead to CTE. So all of those questions are really important. We're not just concerned about football. We're not just concerned about males. We're not just concerned about pros. It's really looking at the whole gamut of things to make sure that all of these sports and all of the athletes can be safe and keep these sports alive.
When you were trying to gather brains for your study of deceased members, how did you approach the families? I mean, that seems like such a good question to ask. Families who just lost their loved one, kind of have your brain so we can study it. How did you even approach that?
Had a few cocktails and tried to think about what I was doing. And, I hadn't really psyched myself up for it because I know how intrusive it is into a period of mourning. And it was, I literally wrote a script to make sure that I would not screw it up by saying the wrong thing, because I knew how important it was to get them. And I knew, I kind of convinced myself that in a year they'll be very happy they did this, even though they don't maybe want to do it today. And I was just really lucky that, the Andre Waters family said yes, because that was the first time I ever tried. They said no, I probably would have given up. Because, and then the second family said yes, and then, the Straussic family. And so it just became, when they said, thank you, we didn't want to do this, but now we understand why, it just gave me the confidence to show up in a lot of people's worst times and ask a hard question.
I have a question actually for Chris. We know about all the people who said yes. How often are you told, hopefully politely, but no?
Good question. Well, so there's a whole process to this. We've learned, the reason why we have more pro brains than we have young brains is because you hear about the deaths much faster. And there's only a window of time to get it. And then you can actually find their phone number listed in various directories and through I used to call Isaiah all the time for phone numbers to other people who know other people. And so if I actually get to talk to the family and actually am able to have a discussion with them before it changes the funeral plans and all that, I'd say 50% say yes. And the ones who say no have good reasons for it. And only, of the hundreds and hundreds of calls I've made, only a couple of families have been upset with that call. But a couple have.
I mean, we were able to film that one scene where they did the, after they'd done the analysis and to hear Bob and Key sort of explain their findings to the family. And I have to say, it's like, what you're saying about they're happy once they've done it down the road, and I think you really see that because so many of these families are looking for an explanation, right? And this is an explanation that can ultimately give them comfort. And we were with you when you made some of those calls, and I could see you really psyching yourself up to make this call, because it is. It's like the worst possible time to ask anybody for anything. And what you're asking them for is the brain of someone they've just lost. So. I don't know how much time we have for report.
Do you find that there's a resistance on the high school level? It was amazing that people that you spoke with, their children continued in sport even though they were having contact. Are people resistant to hearing the message?
I've been answering a lot. Anyone else want to jump in before I do? Cool. There you go, buddy.
I would say the awareness has gone up definitely over the last 5 to 8 years, for sure. You're always going to have a really aggressive, and this is more prevalent than you would think, the really aggressive parent that wants their kid on the field no matter what. You talk about the emotional investment, you see it in the film, the emotional investment, not only from the athlete, but from the parent, the mom, the dad, invested money, invested emotion, invested time in this their son or their daughter playing this sport, and it's not just easy just to kind of give up and kind of face some of the truth that is still gray. I mean, it's not a binary system. It's not yes or no. You have a concussion or you don't, or this level of trauma is not good. So it's not that easy. And, I would say there's a real a large amount of resistance towards this, but that's continuing to fall. And if you really think what I can relate to on the NFL level, this is how you make your money. So a lot of the guys came from nothing like myself, and this is your way to make it out. And if those guys are taking time out from games, time that could potentially lose their job or anything else you would worry about, then it's a serious issue. So I think as it starts there, you see it's able to trickle down, and you see rates of concussions, of diagnosed concussions, I should say, in the NFL tripled or quadrupled over the last 5 years, and it's making a difference. So I think you're always going to have resistance, and it's how much awareness and how much research needs to be done. I mean, answers need to be a little more clear. They're never going to be binary, but a little more clear on kind of guidelines that you set out of how many times your kid is hit over a season. The head count idea that Dr. Cantu and Chris wrote a white paper on. That idea is very simple, but it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. Of know, your kid should not be hit over 1,000 times a year, regardless of season, regardless of sport. And be able to keep track of that somehow through technology is probably the easiest way to do it. So I don't know if anybody else has an answer.
I'd love to add that this is a long-term process, and that I think a lot of the hesitancy in high school or in college is because it's always been that way for them. The parents who are coaches or the coaches of the high school teams, the college teams, this is the way they played, this is the way they grew up, this is the way they've been coaching or playing. It's the parents who are used to things. But if we start early, and if the young kids across all sports learn the games a different way, with the heads taken out of it more, with more awareness, more understanding of it, then they learn to play the game differently. The coaches learn to coach it differently. The parents who then become the coaches later on have different expectations. And so we're at the beginning of this huge culture change, this whole paradigm shift that I have a lot of hope for. And again, I just want to echo what Alan was saying, that it's the big guy who's been making this shift happen, and people listen to him. And now people are listening to the whole story. So 10 years from now, the kids who are learning the game at age 6, 7 now will be in high school. And they won't have the same expectations that the kids who are currently in high school will have.
Let me add one thing. Part of the problem is, you're right that there's a huge gap in high school and with youth. And I dealt with this yesterday when I had someone I've known for 10 years watch this whole thing go down, 12-year-old get a concussion, and call me and ask all the wrong questions. And really was like, can I just send it back in 2 weeks? Like, this seems a little ridiculous. You know, I was complaining of headaches, but they're not that bad. And it made me realize that even if, if you're hanging out with me, you're going to hear about this a lot. But even that wasn't enough to get through. And so to have, the world's greatest, documentary director do this, force people to confront this in an hour and a half and really have to sit there and think, you can't watch this and not rethink your whole past and your whole future and what you're going to do with your kids. And everyone, if you're going to throw your kid in an environment where you know they're going to get hit in the head hundreds of times, you should be forced to have to think about this sort of stuff. Because we know what's going to happen. I guarantee you throw them out there for concussion practice, because you know they're going to all get concussions. And are you ready to do the right thing when it happens? Or are you going to think about how to maybe prevent that?
So maybe one more question. You guys have been a great audience with great questions. Good. Last one? Okay.
How has the NCAA changed since these findings have come out?
How's the NCAA changed? Or has it
Or
changed?
has it?
Well, let me share with you a press release we put out a month ago. So, one conference changed really well, the Ivy League, and we actually had put together a multi-sport concussion committee and soup to nuts reviewed every single contact sport and said, what do we do and how do we make it safer? And I was on that committee, and it was fabulous to see that the only conference who did it. We're actually giving them an award October 24th at the Boston Harbor Hotel at our annual fundraiser. I'll learn more soon after. And other than that, it's a disaster. I actually, the thing that I'm really focused on right now is that it's going to drive them to wake up and say, we're exploiting them for a few $100 million a year. We're not paying them. And also, by the way, we're not also even telling them this is a problem. The NFL made a poster that came out in 2010. And I was on the NFLPA's negotiating committee to say what was on it. And eventually we got to say that concussions may eventually cause early onset dementia, depression, may change your life forever. Serious, all the serious words. And everybody copied that poster and put it up in their locker rooms, except for NCAA, took out all of the bad stuff and basically said concussions will cause rainbows and butterflies. And I was offended by this because we know they're already being exploited for the cash, but at least tell them what they're getting into. And so in January, I called the head of health and I said, you got to change this, it's ridiculous. You're going to warn about concussions, you have to bring up long-term consequences. It went to a vote in June, they voted it down. They're not going to proactively warn these guys of CT. So this should be a hot topic this fall. I've played my cards right, and look for that, but I've been very upset by it. Other than the Ivy League, they're good.
Well, you're an Ivy League guy, though.
Well, but they did it.
It is amazing the difference between what the Ivy League has been doing and what else is not happening. So tell people before they go, if they want to get active on this issue, should they contact SLI? I mean, what should they do?
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Full service.
Yes, if you would like to get active on this issue, please do reach out to us. I'll give you my email verbally, which is nowinski@bu.edu, easy to remember. Or
If you can spell Nowinski.
you're anti-Polish, I still don't like that. You're from Chicago, you should like us. And then go to the sportslegacy.org website, or just stop Isaiah, who's on our board, or stop Dr. Stern if you want to talk research and how we're going to actually have treatment in how many years? Only 2 years?
5.
Thank you, 5. Good. I'll take 5. Or anyway, we got some staff here too. But please, if you want to get involved, just come talk to us on the way out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. The book's opening here in Boston,
October 5th
October 5th, so
at
tell
Boston Common.
Boston Commons,
It's on iTunes now.
tell your friends.
Yeah, but you can download it tomorrow.
You can download tomorrow, but
Facebook is.
Facebook.
Yeah, it's on iTunes, it's on.